In today's episode, I am chatting with the lovely Sarah. At the time of the recording, Sarah is a mum of one boy and pregnant with another boy, and she now has given birth to her second baby boy. In this episode, we chat through Sarah's complicated journey into becoming a mum. She suffered from infertility due to her endometriosis, and her husband was also flying flat out, which made conception really tricky and had to be timed really well. Sarah was just about to start her journey through assisted reproduction when she fell pregnant with her first baby boy. She had been told by an ultrasound technician who was monitoring her ovulation that she would have very little chances of falling pregnant on her own and may not even be a candidate for IVF. But her first baby boy defied all the odds and was conceived just before Sarah was about to seek assisted reproduction services. Sarah then takes us through what her pregnancy was like and the anxiousness that she felt because she had a previous miscarriage. And all of this led Sarah to decide to have an elective induction for her first birth in order to gain control and feel in charge. And then in this episode, we chat through what motherhood was like for Sarah and how it wasn't what she had imagined, and it was a lot more challenging than she thought. And she tells us that one of the things that she found the most challenging was that because she suffered from infertility, she really wanted to be a mom. And when she became one, it wasn't everything she had imagined, and that was sometimes difficult to explain to people around her. And then finally, Sarah takes us through what her plan is for her upcoming birth, and I hope that Sarah will come back in this episode to let us know how her second birth went and how she's feeling having a newborn and a toddler in the house now. During the recording of this episode, there was an issue with Sarah's sound, so I have tried to treat it as much as I can, and I'm so sorry about the quality. And despite this issue, I couldn't not share Sarah's episode because of the important messages that she shares with us. And also, I think this episode might talk to other people who may be experiencing or may have experienced infertility before and who can relate to Sarah's story. You are listening to Kappa with a Doula. I'm your host, Alicia, exercise physiologist and doula. And every week I chat with a mum or mum-to-be about all things pregnancy, birth, and parenting. The stories you will hear in this podcast are real and sometimes raw, but they are all told without any taboo. So grab yourself a cuppa, put your earphones in, and enjoy this episode. Hi, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I think a question I really like to start with is, did you always want to be a mum?
Always, yeah. I was maternal from a very, very young age. So out of all of my friends going through high school, I was the one that said, in 5 to 10 years' time, I will have children, I will be married. This is my life path. The career will come if it comes. But yes, very maternal, always wanted to be a mum and have kids. So yes, definitely.
Amazing. Did you have younger siblings or just cousins maybe, or you were just maternal?
No, not actually a lot in our family. I also have an older brother. He's 4 years older than me, and that's it. So I'm the youngest, and then we weren't very close with our cousins at all. So it was just kind of a very tight-knit family. My parents themselves had trouble having kids, so there was they tried for 6 years before they got my brother, and then another 4 for me. So they'd always, they had a lot of trouble, but couldn't have any more. But yeah, didn't really have any close small children around me, just always liked them.
Yeah, right. did your parents ever find out why it was difficult for them? Was it linked to any, because you're going to talk about your endometriosis. Did your mom maybe have that as well?
Yeah, I think she did. But it was the male factor. So my dad was told pretty early on that he was sterile,
Oh,
and that there was no hope for them. And they actually ended up
no.
on the adoption list and unintentionally fell pregnant with my brother. So they were not expecting that at all.
Wow.
Um, and that my dad was 22 when he found that out. So it was very interesting that it was, sort of from his side. I think my mum, I do think she had endometriosis just because she had like horrific period pain growing up. And I don't know how genetic or hereditary that is, but she seemed to think that all of mine was quite typical, quite normal. So I was like, oh, okay, so you had a tough time growing up as well then.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. See, that's interesting because when when you got your period and you're in that, teenage years, so were you suffering from the get-go? Was it really excruciatingly painful and probably abundant as well?
So I was dead on 12 and a half just before I started high school. I don't remember it being unbearable to start with, but it definitely got worse over the years and worse with stress. So by the time I was in my last year of high school, I was doing ATAR subjects. I found that the more pressure and the more stress I was under, the worse my period would be. And it would get
Hmm.
to the point where so my mum worked at my high school and she would drive me to school. I would be so sick and so sore. Like I would be pale, nauseous. I would be saying to her, Mum, I can't go to school today. But she would make me go just for the first kind of period. And then I would be up at the office and I would be calling down to her department saying, you need to take me home. I'd be curled up in the fetal position a lot of the time. It was pretty horrendous to try and get through a day like that, especially when you've got ATAR subjects rolling around as well. And that was consistent for every month of year 12. It's
Wow.
exactly what happened. So, yeah, I can't remember it being that bad any other year, but it definitely got worse as I got older. So
Mhm.
I just got
Okay.
used to it.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is if your mom was experiencing the same thing and then you're experiencing that too, then that's your normal. So I'm guessing she didn't
Yeah.
identify that as being abnormal. So when did you start to realize that it wasn't normal, and when did you start seeking, help, treatment?
So when I was 18-ish, I went on the pill because I had a boyfriend and that was the done thing.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, it'd be great to skip a period. Like, oh, that would just be fantastic for me. And every time I tried to skip a period, I couldn't. It would just break through anyway. It was
Mm.
very aggressive, very strong. And then from there, I ended up bouncing between a few pills because I would be on one for a couple of months and say, then I would get breakthrough bleeding, or one of them gave me heartburn. All of the fun side effects that come with every
Mm.
single pill that you try. So I ended up going for about six in the time between I was 18 and then 21, just with my GP. And when I got to the stage where I said, look, this new one that I've tried, I'm getting breakthrough bleeding again, it's not sustainable. He at that point suggested a implant.
Mhm.
And so I had the bar put in my arm and I went on a big trip to Europe with my girlfriends, and implant reacted with me. Um, not didn't make me hormonal, but I ended up bleeding for about 6 months straight. And to
Wow.
combat that, they put me on the pill at the same time to try and stop it. Um, and so when I came back from this Europe trip, which I was 21 when 2015, I was 21 when I went on that trip. When I came back from that trip, I sort of said, well, this isn't working. I don't want to be on two types of hormonal birth control. Surely there's another way. And my GP at that point deemed me as a bit of a problem case because it was, becoming difficult to manage any type of hormonal contraception. And so he sent me off to a gynecologist.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, they have a really long wait, so I didn't get in until the end of 2015. Um, And then that's when all of the sort of the discovery of the endometriosis and all of my different hormone levels sort of came up. So I saw the gynecologist. He ran a bunch of tests. Everything he said came back normal. So he couldn't explain my pain at that point. He was just like, oh, it could be endometriosis. There's no way to know unless we do laparoscopic surgery, excision surgery, which I was like, well, do it because I'm so sick of feeling this way. And he recommended at the same time to put a Mirena, an IUD in, to see how I would go with that. Because it was, I think the one I had back then, it was, I'm not sure if they made them as progesterone only. I don't know if they do now. But yeah, he suggested that. But the only other finding that he brought up in all of my blood work was the fact that I had low iron, which I knew because I lose a horrendous amount of blood every single period I get. That was so surprising to me. I've always been like borderline anemic. But then the other thing that came up was my AMH levels, which I had mentioned to you before. So the anti-malarial hormone is a measure of sort of your follicular output in a test. And for, what was I was 21 turning 22, so you'd expect it to be between 15 and 52, 15 being the lower end of that, and mine was 9. So he looked at that and he went, ooh, there's not a lot of eggs going on in there. And he compared my levels to somebody who was in their mid-30s, which is scary for somebody who definitely wanted kids and was only 21, about to turn 22 at the time. And so, yeah, he said, well, let's do the excision surgery. Let's get the Mirena in there, see if anything will improve. I was devastated at that point and couldn't think of anything else except for, I'm not going to have kids. That's it. That's what it sounds like. I've got this very, very small time frame. If my levels are already, the same as someone in their 30s, like that's when you're looking at perimenopause and stuff like that. Like it was, it was devastating. It was horrible to go through, especially knowing that my parents had had issues with fertility as well, and that they waited 10 years for me, 6 years for my brother. So we went ahead with the surgery, and it did. He removed. He said 4 polyps. I'm not sure if that's the correct term for them. There were 5 medium-sized polyps in around outside my uterus. There's one up on my bladder, and they classified it as mild endometriosis, but then also assured me that even if it's mild, that doesn't mean your symptoms are mild. So I was before that still getting horrific pain, even though clinically it was only mild. After that, I'd say the pain probably did improve a little bit, but the Mirena also took away my period completely. So I would still get some of the hormonal breast pain. I would get a little bit of cramping, but I didn't get a period for the entire time I had the Mirena. So that was a nice change for somebody who bled so heavily and consistently my whole life. And it was very regular too. I was every 30 days. It did not let up, not even by a day. So that was like a welcome break and relief. And then shortly after that, because we had I had some follow-up tests sort of every couple of months just to see what my AMH levels were doing. Not that it's particularly accurate when you've got the Mirena in, but I am somebody who really likes information and numbers, and I needed to know what I was working with. And my boyfriend at the time was definitely not somebody who wanted kids until he was 30, for sure. And so I pretty much gave him an ultimatum, and I said, if you don't want to have kids before 30, then you kind of need to go. I can't do this. And so ended up breaking it off with him, and then I was left in this situation where I went, okay, so now I'm 22, I'm alone, and I still have a ticking time frame. That was even scarier than it was before. The idea of freezing my eggs was thrown around, but then it's an incredibly invasive procedure. I'm sure anyone who's considered it knows how expensive it is and how much your body goes through to do something like that. So I just I just thought, oh, hey, wait, see how we go. And so that was April of 2016. And by July, I met my now husband. So that worked out really well.
Yes, it did.
Yep. So, and in the very conventional millennial way, we met on Tinder. So, probably not exactly what he was looking for somebody to come up to him and say, "Hi, I'm on this dating app, and would you like to get married and have children?" But here we are, 6 years later, so something worked.
It's like, if you want to be a dad very soon, swipe right.
I had written that I was new to dating. I was not looking for a serious relationship, and the first person I matched with, I married. So
Nice.
I don't think I would be the poster child for dating apps. I'm not very good at them. But yeah, so my husband Matt's the most beautiful gentleman on the planet. He was 28 when we met. I was 22. And I made it pretty clear to him early on, once I knew that I was very interested in him, that this was the deal. I told him was going to be the next 5 to 10 years of my life, and said, if this isn't what you want, then please don't waste my time in the nicest way possible.
Yeah.
And he says to me that, because at the time he did have to think about it, and he went, you know what, I'm in. And he told me about a year later that he actually only said that because he thought I was hot, and he just wanted to see how it would go. And I was like, fantastic, love the honesty.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, he's very blunt, he's very direct. But we started dating at the end of August in 2016, and we were married by the start of December 2018, so 4 years just gone. So he must have thought I was more than just hot. He was willing to marry me, I guess. But he was with me like from day dot. He was committed to what we needed to do. So as I said, we started dating at the end of August. By the December, I had another appointment with my gynecologist, and he asked Matt for a sperm sample. 3.5 months of dating. He was like, cool, I'll do it. And I was like, I don't know who's the bigger red flag here. Like, both of us just see, like, that's, if somebody told me that story, I would be like, oh, what is wrong with them? But yeah, so, and then thankfully for us, Matt came back as like super fertile. So he was like off the charts. And he, that's his claim to fame. Whenever we talk about our fertility, he likes to point out that he's super fertile. And, you know, he's got like Hungarian sperm or something. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, cool. It's just nice that not both of us are, you know, have terrible fertility. But yes, every appointment we went to, we knew that the levels could go up or down, and they did fluctuate. So from end of 2016 up until when we first started trying for our son Eli, we started trying 2 years later. So my levels did go up and down. They went from 9 all the way up to 14, all the way back down to 7. And they just kind of like stayed in that range. They didn't really go any lower. They didn't go higher. But that was what we were working with. And we knew that if we couldn't fall pregnant naturally, then it was probably going to be IVF. And that was something that we were willing to do before or after we got married. Like, it didn't matter. So anyway, we got married in December 2018. And then we wanted to go on our honeymoon and see if we could do a couple more things before we started trying. And so our doctor granted us about 4 months before he said, okay, this is probably go time. So by the April, we had started trying to get pregnant. And the anxiety and stress that came with that was the worst part of our marriage to date. Both times we've tried to get pregnant, it's horrible. I get incredibly anxious and stressed, and I track my ovulation like, you know, right down to the T. Matt just hated it. He hated it so much. But I came off the marina in April of 2019. And I had to have some tamoxifen to actually kickstart my ovulation because nothing was happening. And that was odd to me that I'd had such a consistent period for years, but after a couple of years of having the Marina, it was like, no period for you. So I was like, okay. Had the ovulation induction, and then we fell pregnant immediately, which was awesome. But my obstetrician had actually at that stage gone over to the UK. Like, he actually left his job completely, gone to the UK, and I didn't know. And so I'd fallen pregnant, couldn't contact him to, get any sort of blood work done to check that it was viable. Finally had some blood work done through a different doctor, and they said that it was a very low HCG level. It's about 25. On the day after I'd missed my period. So I found out a little bit earlier. But then from there, things got a bit worse, and I was getting I wasn't bleeding, but I sort of got that old brown blood, and I didn't know what was happening. And I went to a couple of different doctors, and nobody was saying miscarriage out loud, but that's definitely what it was leading towards. And so by the time I actually went to a new obstetrician and had more HCG blood testing done there, it was already gone. Like, I had already miscarried. My levels had started going down, and that experience in itself was just horrific. It was terrible to go through without the support of, I had to wait about 5 days for any support from a doctor, which, was, especially when it's your first pregnancy, like, you've just started trying, you're so excited, like, everybody who's been pregnant knows that feeling of like, oh my goodness, a positive pregnancy test, and then it all just goes terrible. And I need to know why for things, and a lot of the time you don't get closure, you don't get reasons for miscarriages. But what did come back from my blood work was that my body wasn't producing progesterone by itself. So whether that was because it hadn't gotten used to the Marina being out, which was producing all my progesterone, or I actually found out later I just don't produce a lot of it at all, not naturally. So that was the reason I couldn't sustain the pregnancy. But from that, it just absolutely tanked my mental health. And because of when it was, like, not that people talk much more about miscarriages now, but in the time that we had fallen pregnant and then lost the baby, it wasn't really the thing to tell people, or talk about it, or say, hey, this really terrible thing happened to me and I'm not doing well. Matt and I were sort of like, oh, we'll just keep it to ourselves, which was the worst thing I could have done, because I just pretty much spiraled from there. I became obsessed with getting pregnant again, tracking my periods, tracking ovulation, and Matt was working away. So he's fly in, fly out. We're in WA, and that's very big here. So he was 2 weeks away, 1 week home, which is really, really hard when you're trying to plan getting pregnant, because he was home probably every third time I ovulated, to the point where if he wasn't home when I did ovulate, I would get mad. I would get so mad about it, because it was like, oh, I'm running out of time. I'm running out of opportunities, and you're not even here. So he probably ended up resenting me quite a lot for it. And I didn't have the strategies to know how to cope with that kind of mental spiral. I do now. I'm glad I do now. But we got to about September, and it was just too much. And so I said, look, I'm going to go and book an appointment with a fertility specialist, because even if we've got, I know I can get pregnant now. Like, that's great. But nothing's lining up and nothing's happening. And probably my levels of stress aren't helping. And there's a 3-month wait, roughly. I think it's more now, actually, in WA. It was a 3-month wait when we booked in to see this fertility specialist in WA. And that took us to end of November. And before I went to that appointment, they wanted me to do a whole lot of blood tests and a whole lot of scans. And so blood tests I was used to. They're checking all of my hormone levels. They're checking the AMH, which was it was still in between that 9 and 14. Like, it hadn't really changed that much. But they also wanted me to go and have a pelvic ultrasound to check on my, I think it was my follicular output. There's a name for it.
Okay.
I'm not going to remember what it is. But they wanted to check by an internal ultrasound what my ovaries were doing. And I was like, cool, no worries. I love information. Let's go do that. Let's go see what we're all about. And so we went in. It was the last Monday of November. And I had to go by myself because Matt was away. And I was like, that's fine. Like, I've had ultrasounds before. Like, I'm very big on knowing what's going on. And so I went into this specific obstetric ultrasound place. And they did the exam, and they found one follicle. And usually for somebody my age, you'd expect upwards of 9 or 10 at least. And so I turned to them, and being hopeful as a 25-year-old, being a little bit hopeful, I turned to them and I said, but one follicle can turn into a baby, right? And the technician turned to me and said, at this point, I don't even think you'd be a candidate for IVF.
Wow.
And I just looked at her and I thought, A, that's not your job to tell me. But B, devastating. And she said, they'll probably do another scan next week to see if there's any more, but really you should have at least 5, 10. And I was like, okay. And I remember the doctor of that practice came in and she said very similar to me. She wasn't my doctor. She wasn't the specialist I was about to go and see. She was a different doctor. She said very similar. And both of them, in the space of 10 minutes, asked me if there was a history of early menopause in my family. So I'd just been told there was only one follicle, and then I was asked about menopause. And so those two ideas in my head just broke me pretty much. And I remember going and paying for the appointment, putting my sunglasses on because I was just sobbing. And then Matt wasn't home, so I went to my sister-in-law's and I just broke down. And I said, what if I can't give Matt children? Like, this is what this is adding up to. We thought we were good because the AMH level was, steady, low but steady for X amount of time. But to be told you've only got one follicle, and I hadn't had any IVF medication, I know it can stimulate, but to be told that at that age was it was horrifying. And I called Matt home. I had the appointment on Thursday with a fertility specialist, and I called Matt and I said, do not make me go to that appointment alone for somebody to tell me for the second time this week that I'm probably not having children. And so he flew home the Wednesday and we went to the appointment the morning of the Thursday. And the doctor said, yeah, look, it's not great. She said that my ovaries were very small. So I think she said the average is about 4 to 6 cubic centimeters. Mine are 1 cubic centimeter, both of them. So teeny tiny. So she said, I'm not surprised that you're not producing them. And I don't really have a reason as to why they're that small. Because, they do get smaller as you approach menopause. But she said, look, the only thing we can do right now, because it was at that point, the end of November, she said, it's about to be Christmas, so not a lot's going to happen over December. She said, let's do a hormone tracking cycle and let's just make sure that you're producing hormones and you are ovulating, to which, I've been doing home ovulation tests for months and I knew that I was still getting a consistent period. So in my mind, the food didn't make sense. I knew I was getting an egg. I knew I was ovulating. I knew I was getting my period. So I thought, okay, cool, let's do blood tests. Let's make it happen. And then she said, immediately after that, the plan was probably going to be IUI because Matt works away. She said, we'll start with that because it's easy enough to get a sample from Matt and then try to do essentially timed implantation. And she said, and if that doesn't work, we'll try it a couple of times. If that doesn't work, it's IVF. And I was like, okay. And I at that point had accepted IVF. I had to go to the extreme in my head because assuming anything else would work would just be a little bit too hopeful at that point. And so we had a big chat about it, about how much it was going to cost, and we said, okay, like let's just go all in. We'll do whatever we need to do. Like we both wanted to have kids, and so we did the hormone tracking cycle. So I was going between where we were living and the clinic, which is about 25 minutes away. I was going every morning for about, well, I had to go, that was a Thursday. I went the Friday, the Saturday, and the Sunday. And then they called me on the Sunday and they said, hey, you're ovulating 2 days early. So that may be one of the reasons you weren't getting pregnant before. You've actually ovulated 2 days early. Go for it. They said tonight, tomorrow, and Tuesday. And so we were like, cool, let's go for it. So that was the Sunday night, and we went Sunday, Monday, we got to Tuesday, and we went, we cannot do this anymore. Like when you have to plan to have sex that often, it's just not fun, with all that pressure as well. So the Sunday and the Monday, we were like, we'll try, and then Tuesday we thought, you know what, whatever will be. And then I had to keep going in for tests every couple of days just to check, what my progesterone was doing, what my estrogen was doing, and my luteinizing hormone, which I'm sure anyone who's been through fertility testing or tracking knows that that's what they're going for. And then by the following Wednesday, they called me up and they said, hey, look, your progesterone's trending down, so just come back in when you get your period. And I was like, okay. So that was our last chance, naturally. And so upsetting. I remember being mad, and I was like, okay, that's all right. So I had my staff party on the Friday, and I thought, you know what, I am going to get trashed. That was my solution at that point. I was like, all I'm doing is waiting for my period, I may as well just drink my sorrows. I was at that point. And I woke up on the Friday morning and I thought, well, I better make sure that I can get trashed. Even though they've said this, I'm still a hopeful person. And I had the faintest little positive light out of nowhere. This one little follicle had turned into a baby. And I just went, holy shit, okay. And I rang Matt, who was at work, and couldn't answer his phone. At 6 o'clock in the morning, I was calling him, and I ended up having to text him. I sent him the photo. I sent him the negative of the photo because it was hard to see the line. And he was like, well, I just got 50 messages. That's fantastic. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. And as soon as the clinic opened, I called them and I said, hi, like someone called me the other day and they said my progesterone was really low. I just got a positive pregnancy test at 11 days post-ovulation. And they said to me, oh, okay, well, we don't really check until you miss your period. And at that point, I was so anxious about everything. I said to the nurse on the phone, who was beautiful and lovely and supportive, I said to her, okay, well, the last time I waited until I missed my period, I had a miscarriage. And she went, come in right now.
Good.
And I went, oh, good. Thank goodness. So I went in and I had the test, and then I had my staff party, which I then couldn't drink at or eat any cheese or ham or anything like that. So I had to walk around trying to, not give anything away, being super excited about the fact that I might be pregnant. And they didn't call me until 4 o'clock that afternoon. And so when they called, they said, yes, congratulations, you are pregnant. And at 11 days post-ovulation, I had a HCG level of 150, which was massive in their eyes. They said that is an amazing level to have for this gestation. And I went, wow. Fantastic, good. Over the moon that it had worked, but then also immediately terrified because we'd already lost one before. Yeah. They mentioned to me on the phone that my progesterone was still very low. So in order to support the pregnancy going forward, I then needed to have some beautiful things known as pessary. For 13 weeks, I had to have pessary, which probably the grossest things that you can think of in early pregnancy. So I just had to supplement my own progesterone by
Mm-hmm.
inserting it. So that was lots of fun.
Mm-hmm.
But we made it 13 weeks, and I weaned myself off the pessaries after that at the doctor's advice. And I did have a lot of anxiety throughout that pregnancy, but on the 13th of August, I had a beautiful little boy. So he was due on the 26th, which was my sister-in-law's birthday, actually. But because of how anxious we had been, we opted for an elective induction. I did not want to risk anything happening. I also had a very big need for control at that point. So Matt came home. Well, when I was 37 weeks pregnant, my obstetrician said that the baby was engaged and she wanted Matt to come home earlier. So he was meant to come home on the 12th of August, and he ended up coming home on the 8th. On the off chance that they thought I might go into labour. I didn't at all. That baby was so comfortable in my uterus. He did not move an inch. And by the time they brought me in for the induction, I was only 1 centimetre dilated, which I could have been for another 2 weeks on top of that. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, so we had the elective induction. I opted for an epidural as well because I figured, hey, I've had endometriosis pain for my entire life. Let's just have something that doesn't involve pain.
Yeah.
I was really happy with the decision at the time. And it took 12 hours, but only about 10 minutes of pushing, and we got our little boy out of it. He'll be 2.5 in February. So yeah, that one little follicle that could. My little egg turned into our little boy, even after being told by multiple people that our chances are very slim. So a really positive outcome for that pregnancy.
Yeah, and I think
So
it
that was
really
good.
goes to show that fertility is, even though people train, the obstetricians and the nurses, they train in it and they study it, there's still so much unknown that we just don't know about. And even though, we can try to conceive with IVF, IUI, and all of that, it doesn't always work. And it's just because of those factors that we as human cannot control, we don't know about. And that's how your Eli came to be, even though basically medicine was saying no, you won't conceive because you've got one follicle, it's tiny, blah blah blah. And he's there to prove everyone that it only takes one, and it doesn't have to be big, apparently. It just takes one. Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah,
How
I
did
was the
you
worst candidate on paper to get pregnant.
but see, I don't like it when doctors say, "Oh, you're not a good candidate. Oh, you won't ever get pregnant naturally. Oh, you won't." When they say you cannot or you won't, it's like, no, there are plenty of examples of women that have, and they had those factors which made it impossible. But it is possible, and there's so much we don't know about fertility that we can't account for and that doctors don't know about, and yet they say you can't, you won't. Well, you did. So yeah, I don't like it.
I did. I proved them wrong.
Yeah, exactly. How did you prepare for your birth? Because so you had chosen an elective induction, but did you still, you said you love info, so did you still learn about, how the body works in labor and what you could do to try and, speed up the process, like positions and all of that?
I did absolutely nothing, which was unlike me. So, no, because Matt came home on the 8th, we were meant to be induced anyway on the 17th, and we said, let's bring it forward to the 13th instead. Let's just get this baby out. And I was so fixated on him coming out healthy that I was more than happy just to sit in that bed and wait and just be told what to do. I trust the medical system. I was absolutely happy for the midwives just to guide me through whatever I needed to do, which was perfect for a first birth for me personally. now being pregnant with my second, I've done a lot more research and I have a lot more preferences. And I just think that nurses and hospitals must look at second-time mums and go, oh no, she has more opinions now. Because I was so happy to just go with the flow. My only preferences the first time around were that unless it was life-threatening or medically necessary, I didn't particularly want to have a C-section. I had been told that there was that I had good childbearing hips, and that there was really no reason I shouldn't be able to push a baby out. And so it was just preferential that I was just like, I'd rather deliver naturally than have a C-section if I can. But if baby's in distress, or if I am, then whatever we need to do to get the baby out, that's fine. And they were really good. Like I had a really beautiful midwife the entire 10 of 12 hours. I had a really, really beautiful midwife. She was very caring and very supportive, not just of me, but of Matt as well. And he's going to hate that I'm saying this out loud into the world, but Matt is not somebody who does well with needles. And so he sat in front of me while I had the epidural and still fainted. So the nurses had to come and look after him because he was on the floor. I was the one with the massive needle in my back, but somehow he was the most impacted by that one. He said it was because I was squeezing his hands too tight.
That makes sense.
So you can imagine that Matt is not somebody who wanted to watch the birth from any other angle than next to me. Even the thought of cutting the umbilical cord was terrifying to him, and he was just like, no, I will stand next to you and I will hold him once he is covered in some sort of cloth. But I take that for what he is. He's an absolutely beautiful dad and husband, and he is just not somebody who does pregnancy or birth well.
And
he's not
that's
interested.
Fine.
That's fine. He's been perfect since I came out. So, I have no complaints there. He's just a fantastic partner. So, I thought I'll put that one in just because I embarrassed him before.
That makes sense. I'll make sure it's highlighted. No, and not everyone reacts well to that medicalized setting with a lot of nurses. There's probably there was probably a machine that was monitoring baby. There's potentially at some point there might be blood. Not everyone does well with that, so that's understandable. It makes for a fun story, but it's very, very understandable.
Well, with Matt, he's hypersensitive, so every time he has a blood test, he can feel like every part of it happening, and so it makes him feel quite queasy, and that's because so he's bilaterally deaf. So
that's right.
You don't have one sense, your other senses take over. Matt was born with hearing, but by the time he was 3, he was completely deaf, and he has cochlear implants, which one of the best Australian inventions ever. So he had surgery when he was 6, and then maybe when he was about 12, to have cochlears put in. And as long as he wears them, he can hear everything perfectly. And if he takes them off, he doesn't hear anything at all, which means that our system for getting up to get the baby, or even me right now when he wakes in the night, is me kicking him pretty solidly in the back. Because I'll hear it and then he'll go and get him. We do have another baby monitor that is designed for people who can't hear, but we found it's more effective if I just push him to wake him up.
Good. Well, you can be the baby monitor.
But because of that, yes, exactly. And every single time, I will credit Matt every single time he's home, because he only gets the 7 days home. Every time Eli wakes up, even now at 2.5, I can, tap him on the shoulder and, usually just show him the baby monitor now, and he can see that Eli's up, and he will go every time. He never asks me to get up. So, props to him for doing that, because I know a lot of people don't get that as well. But so he gets really hypersensitive in terms of having needles himself. When we had Eli, he opted not to go to any of the needle appointments because it made him queasy to watch as well. And I was like, I can do that. Like I've had, with all of the fertility tracking that we had over the years, I've been poked and prodded so many times. I'm very used to having blood tests and things like that. So, he just can't, and that's fine.
Yeah.
So I don't know what he's going to be like in this labour, and I'm intending to not have the epidural straight up. You're going to
Yeah.
see a lot more graphic things and possibly yelling. We'll see.
Maybe, who knows? So with your husband being deaf, was it a genetic condition that led to him becoming deaf in early childhood?
So we assume so, um, but nobody else in his family is deaf. So,
Oh,
a fun
right.
fact that I'll tell everybody who will listen is that 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents.
Wow.
Um, and so I work as an AUSLAN interpreter. That's my
Yeah.
main job. I'm also a primary school teacher, but that one's quite recent. But as I've already said, not how we met. Definitely through Tinder, nothing to do with him being deaf and me being an interpreter, which it would have been a cuter story, but not how that happened. But yeah, so I'm an AUSLAN interpreter, so I go out and uh, my job in the community is just to interpret for deaf people who need the support.
Yeah.
And it's a fantastic career to have. I'd recommend it to honestly anybody because it's a great pay rate and you're doing a great thing. But anyway, getting back to Matt, so no, nobody in his family was deaf. So it seemed to have come out of nowhere. I don't actually think they got a medical reason.
Right.
Just no, his hearing just decreased slowly from birth to about age 3, and then it was pretty much gone. So
Wow.
he was very, very lucky. He had the most supportive parents in the world. Matt grew up in rural WA, so 2 hours away from Perth, where any sort of specialist help was. And his mum was a kindergarten teacher and his dad was a farmer, so long hours out on the farm. But his mum was the most committed parent that I'd ever met. She would sit with him and do all of the exercises every day. And then he said that when his dad would come home from the farm, he would then sit with him and take over. So they were very committed to giving him speech. They would drive to Perth I think it was every week or every second week. So that's 2 hours there, 2 hours back, just for him to have a speech pathology appointment, which he hated. Like, he hated going to speech pathology, but it was necessary for him to develop speech, which doesn't happen with every deaf person. He was very lucky the cochlears worked for him. And at that point, AUSLAN wasn't as popular. There wasn't as many people working as interpreters, working as teachers of AUSLAN. So that was the least likely option. So speech was the way it went. And now Matt is an incredibly successful adult who, unless you notice the cochlears on his head, you probably wouldn't know that he's deaf.
Probably, yeah.
And that comes a lot with how he was raised. So I'm very lucky. And on top of that, there is some research to say that the genetics of being deaf, it's higher in males. And so when we found out we were having a boy, that was on our minds. Not that it would be an issue because, you've got a deaf dad and a mum who's an interpreter. So, you're in the best hands really at that point. But we didn't get a hearing test until day 5 of Eli being alive. And he was perfectly fine. And then 18 months later, I thought his hearing might be decreasing. And I was told, no, he was just ignoring me. So, as little toddlers like to do. So, paid $100 for them to tell me, no, he actually got above average hearing. He's just not responding to you because he's interested in what he's doing. And I was like, oh, great. That'd be right.
Wow, that's really interesting, and I don't know much about cochlear implants, but I did know that it doesn't work for every every child because it's usually fitted as a child, I think. And I did know that, and it's really fortunate, as you said, that for Matt it worked really well, and then he could do basically speech therapy, and then learn to talk, right? That's amazing.
Yeah, he's done really, really well. So, glad that he had that option. He was probably one of the first people to get a cochlear implant too, because so he's 6 years older than me, and Cochlears were really only out and about in the late 80s. So he was born in 88, and he got his in 94. So
Right.
it was still new, and they're so much more advanced now. But yeah, it was sort of trial and error for him, I guess, because it could have gone completely the opposite way. He could have lost all of his hearing, or it could have just not worked. So yeah, very, very lucky that he's like the best case scenario for a cochlear implant.
Yeah, that's and what's amazing as well is, as you said, you're an AUSLAN interpreter, and he's deaf, and you didn't meet because of that. But if he didn't have, for example, the cochlear implant, you probably could have communicated with sign language because you would have known it. Granted, he would have learned AUSLAN, obviously, because AUSLAN is the Australian Sign Language. Is that right?
Yeah. Yes, that's right. So, and because Matt had the cochlears, he didn't end up learning any AUSLAN. So when we met and I noticed that he had cochlears, I said to him, "Oh, you've got cochlear implants." I said, "Do you know AUSLAN?" And he goes, "No, do you?" And I was like, "Yeah." So he had at that point been minimally involved in the deaf community. Whereas I was quite heavily involved at that point. But actually, no, since 2012, he had been involved in the sporting side of things. So every state in Australia has their own sports team for the deaf. I'm not sure if it's every single sport, but anyway, so Matt is part of the Western Australian Deaf Cricket team. And every year they compete in what's now called the NCIC, which is the National Cricket Inclusion Championships. They're generally over in Geelong, but actually next year's is in Brisbane. So he's coming over. And yeah, so that's in February, and he's very gracious that as a new mother of two, I'm allowing him to go because he is a very prominent part of the team. He's been captain a few times, vice captain a few times, and then just recently, so this year, he actually, when everybody was getting COVID, myself included, he went over to Brisbane to play in essentially the Deaf Ashes. So it was against England, and he was the vice captain of the Deaf Australian team. So that was, he's very humble, but I love to talk about how fantastic he is because I've never been good at any sport ever. So he's always been heavily involved in the sporting side of the deaf community, but he has had to develop AUSLAN skills for that. So he had none, I said none in 2012, and he's had to learn a little bit off me, and he's still, I would say, pretty bad. And I've told him that Eli's going to overtake him at some point. So he needs to get better, but when they play in the deaf competitions, anybody who has cochlears or hearing aids has to remove them to make it fair for everyone else. So they can't rely on any hearing they have or any speech. They have to use AUSLAN. So he was forced really to improve upon his skills for that. But yeah, he did the year after we met, he did exceptionally well in that. I didn't know anything about cricket. I'm the least sporty person that you can think of, but I know enough to now tell people how impressive his scores were. So, and I can understand it from a distance. I don't enjoy cricket, but I will watch it just to reinforce that I know what's going on. And so in Matt's best game, he scored 158 off 61 balls in a T20 match. So if anybody knows cricket, it was good enough to get him into the Deaf Hall of Fame. That's amazing. So so I'll always say that it's his claim to fame, but I tell everybody that I married him. So I don't have any sporting achievements to go off. But no, he's a very humble person, but he excels at quite a few things, which is, I'm very proud when he does things like that. So as I said, he'll be over in Brisbane in February playing NCIC. So
amazing,
nice for him just to go and have a little break. But yeah, and then there was a competition this year that was in Dubai. So the Australian team went over to Dubai to play the international deaf cup. He couldn't get the time off work, so he couldn't go. And so they said, well, we need you to come to the February one then.
Okay.
So I had to be a little bit more lenient there, even though we'll have potentially a 3-week-old. I was like, okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Remember this. Remember my generosity.
That's right. And so you said you're teaching Eli AUSLAN, right? So he could sign before he could talk, right?
Yeah, so he did quite a bit of AUSLAN before he started talking, and then since he started talking, I have been horrendously lazy with it. So now that he took quite a while to talk. I don't think that has anything to do with the fact that he had AUSLAN beforehand, but it would just be basic signs. So he could tell me if he wanted mum or dad or a bottle or food, sort of basic signs that you would probably learn in baby sign anyway. But we would give him sort of like some animals and things like that. He is really focused on speech at the moment. Like he's just started 6 months ago, he wasn't saying 2 words in a row. And now we're getting 6-word sentences. So he's really in that big brain development stage where he is speech focused and wanting to copycat everybody. And so if I tried to intervene with another language now, I don't think I'd have much luck, but he will get some eventually. I need to, maybe with the next one being born, I'll amp it up a little bit so they can have their own secret language they use together. But yes, my aim would be to slowly introduce that a little bit more than I have done now. But he does know enough.
Yeah. And so I guess we've done a big diversion, but so you are currently 37 weeks pregnant, which is amazing. How was that journey into conceiving baby 2?
So not dissimilar from Eli. So yeah, I'm 38 weeks on Sunday, so I'm ready whenever he is. Matt comes home from work tonight. So I said, as soon as you get home, 7 o'clock tonight, just any time from, I would love for him to be a January baby, but, whenever he's ready. I'm feeling pretty comfortable. I'm definitely not as anxious. With Eli, I just wanted him out. With this baby, I'm like, I got a smack on the wrist from my obstetrician yesterday because I hadn't packed my hospital bag. So that's what I was doing last night. And this morning, he said, oh my goodness, Sarah, please, can you do that? And I went, okay, I guess. The nursery wasn't set up either, so my mum's been over all day helping me sort of tear through that. But in terms of conceiving this little one, so we didn't go back on any contraception except for the withdrawal method because Matt's away so often and I track my ovulation so well that we know, when to avoid and when not to. So once we had Eli, I breastfed for about 8 months. First 4 months were pretty terrible because he had a tongue tie, no one diagnosed. But then once that was released, we had a really fantastic time together. But I was told by our fertility specialist at 8 months postpartum, if you want to have more children, this is kind of the time where you need to stop. And I was like, okay, no worries. And so I had some more tests done at that stage. I had my AMH done. I had the follicular count ultrasound done again as well. Everything just to sort of give us an idea of what was happening. I was made aware that I would very likely need to have progesterone pessaries again for any subsequent pregnancy I had because my levels were just not what they needed them to be to sustain a pregnancy generally. And so I was like, cool, yep, all good to go. And I remember I went and had all my tests done on the 1st of April, so April Fool's Day. And then I went back in to see my fertility specialist a week later, and she said, I promise you I am not joking. Your AMH has gone up to 16, which is in the normal range for the first time in my life. She goes, I can't class you as having fertility issues anymore because you don't. And I was like, oh, okay. And then the ultrasound that I had, which I was very nervous about because obviously very tiny ovaries, only had the one follicle last time and I've just come off breastfeeding. I I went in and they had trouble finding my left ovary. Likes to hide apparently, but when they did, they said that they all up on both, like as in total, found 9 follicles.
Wow.
So in the space of 2 years, about, I had gone from having 1 tiny little follicle to 9.
Amazing.
I had 4 on one and 5 on the other. And they were like, well, yes, there's definitely some there. And this wasn't even a cycle where I was trying to get pregnant. This was like coming off of breastfeeding. And I went, okay, so something's happened. And my doctor said to me, she said, I don't want to sound cliche, but sometimes being pregnant and having a baby can rewire things. And it can not fix you, but it can improve things. And I had never been one to believe things like that, because I absolutely detested when people would say, oh, it'll happen, I just believe you'll have a baby. That's the worst thing you can hear when you're having fertility issues, is that they believe that it'll happen because of hope and magic or whatever, and not science. And so I went to my doctor and she said, yeah, look, your ovaries are still small, but somehow you're getting 9 follicles off them, and your AMH is back up into average numbers. And I had said to her at that point, so I was still studying my teaching degree, and I had 2 pracs left before I was qualified. And so I said to her, it's April right now. If I can wait 6 months before we start trying for another baby, then I will be able to finish my degree before I give birth. And I was expecting her to say, well, if you want a second kid, I already told you that you have limited time. But she said, you know what, I'm actually pretty comfortable with that idea. She said, let's get uni done. Let's get it out of the way. So Matt and I waited till the October. We went back to have an ultrasound, and I didn't have to have an appointment at that stage. I had another ultrasound. Same kind of deal. I had about 9 follicles. So they were like, cool, your body's doing what we want it to do. That's great. Go for it. And so then timing was our big issue. So we started trying in the October. I had a 5-week prac from October through till December. As much as I tried not to, I did become a bit stressed and obsessed with the tracking, which Matt didn't love. And then by about the end of January, I had asked Matt to start coming home when I ovulated, because nothing was happening. And I mean, very short space of time from October to December. I know that's only a couple of months, a couple of cycles, but we knew how long it took before. And I didn't really want to push it any more than the 6 months that we had already been given by our doctor. So he started coming home with my ovulation, and we had it tracked just by our local GP, and we still weren't falling pregnant. And so I had at that point already booked in to see our original fertility specialist, and she said, look, let's just book it in and then we'll go from there. And so I went back to see her. I had a phone appointment with her actually, and she'd done my blood tests again, and I rang her up and I said, look, nothing's happening, but my GP said that all of my bloods are normal, except obviously the progesterone's not rising as it usually does. I expect that, that's fine, but we're not falling pregnant. And she went, okay. Well, she said, let's do a tracking cycle again. And then because I was about to start my last prac in the April. So she said, let's do a tracking cycle, and then if that doesn't work, we'll wait until after your prac finishes in July, August, and then we will do IUI or something like that. Because at that point, Matt was so sick of trying that he said he would rather pay for IUI than have to keep trying naturally. Like, it was just getting to him so much, the pressure of trying to fall pregnant. And so I was like, yep, okay, no worries, last ditch effort. And I remember even saying to my fertility specialist on the phone, last time we did a tracking cycle, we fell pregnant with Eli. How funny would it be if that happened again? And it did. So we had we tracked our cycle in April, so it's just after my birthday. And they called again and they said, look, you're ovulating. Matt happened to be home. He wasn't meant to be home. And we fell pregnant, and I wasn't expecting to. I found out the exact same days past ovulation as Eli. I was 11 days post ovulation, and Matt wasn't home. And so I waited until that night to tell him, and I got it on video.
Oh, nice.
And so still had to go back on the progesterone pessaries, but 38 weeks on Sunday. So another beautiful little boy who's hopefully, it's very, very hot in WA at the moment. So I'm kind of hoping within the week would be nice. But yeah, so not a dissimilar experience, still a lot of stress and fertility specialists involved, but a lot less anxiety. And I have done a lot more research this time, so I'm opting to go without an epidural if I can. If I can't, I'm very open to medical intervention. Like that's fine for me. But I just want to see what I can do. I'm not too sure I can get any more kids out of that. So this might be it. So I thought I may as well just have experience labour for what it is. I didn't go into labour naturally last time. My waters didn't break by themselves. So I just thought, well, let's just let's see how we go. And then if I still need help, I need help, and it really doesn't matter as long as I get that little boy in my arms. So Matt's really excited to come home tonight because he won't be going back to work until March. But then on top of that, he did say to me that he's not really keen on the fact that he'll only be sleeping 3 hours at a time. And I said, well, you and me too, buddy. You know, this is about to be our reality of having a toddler and a newborn. So uncharted waters, not something we've done before, but definitely very exciting for our little family.
So when it came to, I guess, explaining to Eli that you were pregnant and he was going to be a big brother and then he's going to have a little brother, do you think he understood that the concept of having a little brother?
Initially, not so much. The more pregnant I've gotten, I think there has been a level of understanding. I know conceptually for a 2-year-old to look at a belly and go, baby, is not, like, doesn't really make sense to them. But this morning, actually, he came up to me and he said, baby, in there. And he pointed to my belly. But I think that comes with the fact that he didn't have a lot of speech 6 months ago either. So he couldn't articulate what he meant. But sometimes I'll say to him, oh, you know, we'll have a bath together, and I'll say, do you want to wash the baby? You can just tell when he's not really fussed about being a sibling, because he'll go, no. And I'll be like, oh, do you want to come and touch mummy's belly? No. But then other times he'll come and pat my belly and stuff like that. I think for Eli, once his brother's here, he'll be absolutely obsessed with him and he'll love it. And Matt and I are very conscious about how we parent. So, you know, whenever I've been sore, I've made sure not to say, oh, I'm sore because of the baby or anything like that. So I'm trying not to build any resentment there. But yeah, Matt doesn't think he'll be jealous at all. I think that he will be very jealous of us spending time with the baby instead of him. We've definitely kept him at daycare 3 days a week, so he's got some routine. So we can sort of give him an out from always being around his little brother. But I think with toddlers, you just got to take everything as it comes. Like, he's having such big brain development leaps at the moment, and we just can't tell how he's going to respond to having a sibling. So
yeah, that's right.
Whatever will be, I guess. Can't put him back now. Like
That's right. And I think it's really hard because newborn, obviously they need you like a lot, but a toddler, they also have brain development. They go through, you know, stages of learning. They start to conceptualize, you know, the world around them, and then they need you a lot as well. So it's almost like it doesn't really matter whether it's a newborn or a toddler. They will need you a lot because that's where they're at. So it's about, I guess, I spoke to another mom and she was saying the more she involved her toddler in the newborn taking care routine, the more she could basically attend to both at the same time. And instead of dividing her time, it was made possible for the toddler to not feel isolated and like, oh, mum is busy. And at the same time, she could take care of the newborn without being like, oh, I have to choose, basically. So And I think, as you said, Eli
Yeah,
is
where
almost 2.5, so it's a good age to be involving him as well. And obviously, if he wants to, not forcing.
yeah, we're definitely. I've set up a few little things recently to try and get him involved. So we've got like a trolley of things with nappies and wipes and things like that. So he's at that really beautiful age where he still likes helping. So he'll happily go and get something for me.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping really that, you know, when I intend to breastfeed again, so I'm hoping he will go and get a towel or a pillow or something for his brother, or go and get a nappy for me. I think he'd really enjoy doing things like that. But Matt and I have also discussed, because we're lucky enough to have him home for almost 8 weeks, like that doesn't happen for most parents. With annual leave or even parental leave, that's 2 weeks usually for dad. We get Matt for 8, which is really great. But I said to him, I want to prioritise still spending time with Eli, the two of us, and not make him feel like he's been replaced by the baby. So I said, you know, Eli still has a nap from 12 till 2 every day. He's really good with it. And I said, if that works in with when the baby is sleeping as well, and I'm not up breastfeeding or even for a portion of it, I'd like to go in and have the nap with Eli, because we're going to be absolutely tired anyway. And then if I'm in with him without the baby, he can at least think, oh, well, like I've got mum to myself at the moment. Whereas Matt can spend time with the baby as well, obviously. That there's a really good bond between Eli and Matt, and so I know that will only get stronger in the early days of having a newborn. But I want to make sure that there's no sort of resentment towards his brother or me, which, I mean, you can't predict, you can't really plan for. But definitely, there's ways that I'm trying to get him more involved. And, you know, we will probably mix feed quite early in terms of I'll express so he can give his brother a bottle, little things like that, or play with him. So yeah, we're trying to be very aware of things like that. But you just don't know what's going to happen with toddlers. So
yeah, that's right. And, you know, like toddlers they've got big emotions some days, and you're just not prepared for it. But that's how it is. And I think, you know, as you said, you can only try and prepare things and then see how it is. So you just go with the flow and you just adapt to whatever Eli is showing, whatever Eli is putting down. You just can respond to that and manage it as much as you can. And at some point you'll find a routine that works for everyone, because obviously going from a family of 3 to a family of 4 is a transition for everyone in the family. So it's about finding balance again.
Yes. So I'm very lucky to have Matt home for as long as I do, because I'm hoping that we can kind of work that routine out while he is home. Of course, then there is the downfall of him going back to work, and dealing with Eli's reaction to that, and then also having 2 children by myself all of the time. But yeah, everything will work out. It has to. I mean, to be told you're not really going to have children and end up with 2, I feel like everything else will fall into place. It'll be hard, but as I said, I've got a lot more strategies these days in terms of managing my mental health. When Eli was about 10 months old, I started seeing a therapist once a month, and that was probably the best thing that I could have done, because you just need to talk. Sometimes you need to get it out. You need to have somebody validate you and tell you that you're not going crazy and that your brain is absolutely fine to be thinking different thoughts. And so I'm very grateful to her. But yeah, I'm a much more calm, approachable version of myself, and I feel like that's the best thing that I can give this baby, is just somebody who's open to everything. So yeah, exciting time.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm glad you're mentioning that, because I think maternal mental load, and also obviously paternal, not just the mum, but the mental load of raising a child and then obviously raising 2 is huge. It's, you know, I think on social media they joke that it's a full-time job, but it's beyond a full-time job. It's just, and when you're a stay-at mom, it's permanent from the time they wake up to like pretty much you going to bed. You know, you're looking after the child, and then you're making sure they haven't hurt themselves, they're all good. You're managing whatever emotions, obviously you're managing your own mental health while also trying to probably keep the house tidy, clean, feed them, all of that. It's huge. There's so much.
It's a lot.
mental load.
Yeah. I figured out quite early on that I was just terrible at being a 24/7 stay-at-home mum, and so Eli's been in daycare for at least 2 days a week since he was 6 months old, because I needed the break. Especially with Matt not being here 2 weeks at a time, I needed an outlet. I needed somewhere for him to go. And then at the same time, I wasn't then able to pick up work, which made me feel like I was doing more than being just a mum.
Yeah,
like
that's right.
It was isolating to me just to be at home all the time. Not many of my friends have children, or or some of them do now, but they didn't when I was born. And so it was very isolating just to be stuck at home all the time. And so, I'm very honest with all of my girlfriends now. I will tell them, it's so exciting to be pregnant. It's so beautiful to be a mum. There are so many moments that you look at your child and you think, how are you here? You are the most beautiful little human on the planet. And then there are some days that are just so terrible that you think, why did I do this? This is the worst. This is hard and horrible. And nobody really warns you about stuff like that.
That's right.
I even say, one of my friends, she had her daughter's she's almost 8 weeks old. And I remember saying to her, she had, her pregnancy wasn't too bad, but she did have a lot of pelvic pain. And she wasn't enjoying it towards the end. And I would just consistently say to her, I said, I'm never going to lie to you. And it's okay if you hate it. I absolutely hated the first 6 months of motherhood. Eli had a dairy intolerance, which presented as reflux and colic. So he would scream constantly. He had a tongue tie. He couldn't breastfeed properly. I had a husband who, after 7 weeks, went back to work and left me alone with this tiny little baby who I didn't know how to fix. And I hated it. I absolutely hated it. And you feel horrible at the time as a new mum, especially as somebody who had been through fertility treatment, well, not treatment, but, who had struggled with fertility so much and wanted children so much, to turn around and say, I hate this. This is horrible. Why didn't anybody tell me? I mean, it wouldn't have stopped me, but, why didn't anybody say this is going to be really hard and really terrible sometimes? And nobody's going to be able to help you. Nobody's going to be able to fix it. So I always say that to my friends. I'm like, it's okay if you hate it. Like, you're going to hate parts. You're going to love parts too. And just giving myself that space, even with this pregnancy, I'm probably less than 2 weeks away from having a newborn. And I remembered how bad that was. There are some beautiful parts as well, because you have a tiny little baby and they are the cutest thing ever. And you made them with your body and it is fantastic, but also, whoa, it's a lot. And I know what I'm getting back into, and I'm giving myself the space and the grace even just to accept whatever comes with that, and allow myself time just to adjust again, because going from an independent toddler back to a newborn is going to be a whole big change, and I'm just going to have to take everything as it comes and not feel guilty about it, because I'm going to have hard days. I'm going to have great days, but it's I think a lot of people get the message that if you don't love motherhood, that something's wrong with you, and I hate that so much, because nobody loves every day. Nobody. It's so hard to be a mum, even if you have all the support in the world. So it's hard. And so, just give yourself space to dislike it.
That's right. And that's
not feel guilty about it.
That is such a beautiful message. Like, it's something that I have never heard before. I've never heard anyone say, oh, it's okay to hate it. Like, as you said, I've heard well, if you don't love every moment, then you're not a good enough parent, or you're not a good enough mum. I've never heard anyone say that, and I love it, because that's true. You can hate it. You can hate some days and go, oh, there's always a tomorrow. and you can only hope it
Mm.
gets better. And it does. And usually it does. Usually it's a, the washing machine broke that morning and your toddler's having a tantrum and you're just like, I just can't deal with today. Like, I just can't. And then the next
Yeah.
day, it's fine. The toddler's got less emotions and the washing machine's fixed, you've got a new one coming and it's great again.
Yeah.
But that's how it is. Life is so random. And,
Mm.
we have emotions, we have our own mental health to manage, and then you've got your child's mental health and emotions and brain development and leaps and all of that
Mm.
that is basically thrown at you, and you have to manage that as well. And yeah, it's hard, but as you said, it's
Yeah.
challenging, but it comes with perks. Obviously, you get to raise a beautiful child. You get to see them just learn to grasp things, crawl, walk, run, talk. It's amazing. It's just so good. But yeah, sometimes
Yeah.
it's hard. And as you said, you'll find a balance between your independent toddler, who will probably become a little bit less independent at that point. They will probably need you
Yep.
heaps more, and then having a newborn who's extremely dependent on you. But that's
Mm.
okay. As you said, you'll give yourself the space to just be in that moment, be present, and take it as it is, and not have any expectations of, I shouldn't do this, I shouldn't do that, I should be doing the dishes right now, I should be doing this, I need to, and you'll just give yourself the time, the space, and you'll have Matt as well, which is
Yeah.
amazing. Having him around will help too. He can play with Eli, he can feed baby, he can help, so that's amazing.
Yeah, and he's an absolute partner in our household. Like when he's home, most of the cooking is him. Most
Amazing.
of the cleaning is him. I am not the perfect homemaker. I never have been. I never will be, and he's very aware of that. So when he comes home, he does a lot of picking up after me,
Hmm.
and he's never complained because that's just life, and it is how it
That
is.
is.
And
Hmm.
I think as well in terms of modeling for your kids, like Eli doesn't see a picture perfect house that is clean all the time.
Hmm.
He doesn't have a mum who's dressing up, putting makeup on every day. Like, who knows how many times I've worn an outfit in a week. But he is getting the modeling of how to regulate emotions and how to be human and to know that sometimes things aren't going to go the way that you want them to, but that's still okay. And if you
Mm.
have a bad day, that's all right too. You just pick yourself up and you keep going the next day and you try and work on whatever happened from then. And I mean, so far, Eli, he's the most beautiful, gentle little kid. And I think that comes from being, in some part, in being raised in such a nice, calm environment. Like there's not a lot of chaos here, and he knows that there's mess and
Hmm.
there's there's disorder, and it just is.
Yeah.
And so he's very used to that, and so that's what I'm putting that down to anyway. Hopefully, um, he will grow into somebody who's able to regulate really well because he's seen it modeled to him growing up, which is hard to do. I think in our generation that wasn't really modeled particularly well
Mm.
to us, as is just life. And so to work on trying to regulate your own emotions as an adult and then
Mm.
trying to model that to a child is difficult, but it's good work and it's very beneficial for them. I think that's how we're trying to be as parents, and I hope that it works long
Yeah.
term.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's a really big thing now that's
Mm.
started to emerge as a topic of discussion. It's about letting your children have emotions, but teach them how to handle those emotions. So not say, "Oh, boys don't cry," but say, "Yes, you can cry, and that's okay." And teach, for example, if they've got anger bursts, like what to do with this anger, and what to potentially not do as well, and how to express it and how to feel emotions. That's amazing. That's exactly what you're doing. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's very good. Matt's and he's on board and the most patient person on the planet. So
Amazing.
he's, the best person you could have to model it as well. So yeah, hopefully that'll pay off long term. Just knowing what to do with any sort of emotion that you have, and not bottle it up inside. And being a mum of almost two boys, it's something that's on my mind as well, because emotions aren't dealt with particularly well. I think they haven't been dealt with very well with boys previously. And so I am making it a personal mission to make sure that my boys know how to regulate, and they know how to express their emotions and how to talk to people about it. So, and if that's the best I can do, then that's fine.
Wow.
That's my only job for now.
And that's a good enough job. That is plenty. You will be busy for the next however many years doing that. Thank you so much, Sarah, for coming on the podcast. It's been really amazing, and there's been so many really amazing messages that you've just passed on. It's been so good. Thank you so much.
No worries. Thank you for having me. It's been great to sort of relive everything and talk about it. And I just I feel very appreciative to have this entire experience, and now to be able to put it out there and share it, and whether this could be a little beacon of hope for somebody, or it's just nice to listen and be able to relate to something. It's been really great to get my story out there. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast, or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.